Welcome back everybody to another episode of our weekly Moto News Roundup, where this week we'll take a look at some of the best reactions to the new BMW R12GS. Triumph have made the full announcement of their new pair of enduro bikes. There are a couple of bargainous looking new adventure machines courtesy of Morbidelli, and a bunch of bikes have been announced for being available in the US for 2025, some of them really quite affordable, some of them not. Then, Bimota have announced the pricing for their World Superbike Homologation Special. Honda's retro CB1000 Hornet gets another step closer to being real, and we'll round off with some beautiful customs courtesy of Triumph France. But let's get started with that new BMW R12GS, which we covered on Thursday, so if you want to see the full details and you missed it, then just click through to the channel and have a look at that. But my overall first impressions are that it's a beautiful looking retro bike, and it gets a chassis which in some ways looks like it could be a pretty serious off-roader. But as for your reactions, well, one of the things that got flagged up is the fact that it does look quite a bit like a Royal Enfield Himalayan. If you look at the tank shape, the seat shape as well, the single round headlight, and the 21-inch front wheel and the 17 at the rear, yeah, I think I can see this one. If you put them side by side, they do look really quite similar. Ricardo Salcedo said, beauty, but doesn't it look sort of like the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450? And someone on YouTube said, BMW's take on upgrading the Himalayan 411. Looks like a 450, but ditch the liquid-cooled engine, add the weight and price tag, and you have one mean coffee-stop machine. Plus, I did notice the Option 719 really expensive version has a paint job which does look really quite similar to one of those that's available on the Gorilla 450. So, coincidence? Or do motorcycle designers take a little bit of inspiration from each other? Let me know what you think down in the comments. There is definitely a lot of positive reaction for this bike though, with Vegasaurus7 saying this thing looks amazing, people have been asking for this for years, a simple GS like the old ones, and Paradox Workshop said finally a GS that looks like a proper GS. So it does look like BMW have really got something right with this one, although there are, I think, if you look at the broad themes in the comments, two main key areas of concern. I think both relate to whether it's really going to be practical off-road. You know, one of them is the fact that it's really quite expensive, so not something you necessarily want to damage or drop. And the other is the kind of weight and the cumbersome nature perhaps of such a wide and vulnerable engine. Jala6707 said, absolutely a fantastic looking bike, but too expensive and too heavy. Nobody's going to take this bike off-road. Spataro Giuseppe 3616 said, nice looking bike, but 230 kilograms. I'll never understand the concept of heavy bikes for off-roading. Then Rob VDRDP said, starting at 20 grand in the Netherlands, euros that is, stupid pricing. But then sometimes I guess a bike doesn't have to be totally practical or affordable in order to be desirable, as Chewyland Live points out, saying the bike makes absolutely no sense to me, but probably my favourite bike I've seen in years. Still, if you do want something that is truly off-road capable, but that you can still occasionally ride on the road, then the full reveal of Triumph's new enduro bikes, which they teased last week, will probably be right up your street. Following on from their 250 and 450 motocross bikes, well, there's the TF250E and TF450E, and while they do have plenty in common, of course they do, you know, there are still plenty of tweaks across the whole bike to make them more appropriate for enduro riding. They're 6-speed now, for example, as opposed to the 5-speed motocross bikes, and they also say they've given the engines a little more inertia, a bit more rotating mass, in order to make them a bit more difficult to stall. Then there's a different swing arm geometry for tighter turning, and also while there's still loads of suspension travel at 300mm at the front and 313mm on the shock, that is 10mm less than the other bikes, and that does give you a little bit of a drop in seat height by 5mm. I'm, to be honest, not much of an enduro guy though. I think I proved that when I reviewed a Yamaha a couple of years back. But I guess some indication of whether these bikes are any good will come in the next couple of months, because their race team have entered 2 upcoming rounds of the Hard Enduro World Champs, so the Valleys Extreme in Wales and Erzberg Rodeo in Austria. If you do decide to buy one, well, bikes are in dealers as of May, and they'll cost £9,795 for the 250 and £10,395 for the 450. Now, also on the new bikes front, I got news this week that 2 new adventure bikes were now available in the UK from Chinese-made brand Morbidelli. They're called the T1002V and the T1002VX. Maybe they need to work on the names a bit, not exactly rolling off the tongue, but at just about £8,000 each, well, they do look pretty interesting, primarily to me, because they both get a proper V-twin, as opposed to the absolute slew of parallel twins in this sort of affordable middleweight adventure bike part of the market. Also, it's 997cc, so just shy of a litre, and it makes just under 90 horsepower, which might not set the world alight, but it should have a nice sound and feel to it that perhaps can make up for a bit of a lack of, top-end power. Thing is though, as is often the case with Chinese bikes, the level of kit and equipment and the level of spec is pretty phenomenal for the money, with 4 riding modes, a colour TFT screen, 12V and USB-C chargers, full LED lighting, crash bars, handguards, heated grips and heated seat, all bundled in for the standard price, which I can remind you is $8,000. Both models are suspended on fully adjustable KYB suspension, brakes are from Zhejiang 2, so a couple of known names there. And while both get a 19-inch front and a 17 at the rear, the thing that differentiates them is that the V gets cast wheels, the slightly more affordable bike, and the VX gets spokes, so potentially a bit more off-road biased, although there doesn't appear to be a massive difference between the two. So yeah, for the money, they look well spec'd, and even a full 3-piece set of aluminium luggage will cost you just 495 quid on top, which is basically the price of like one case from Ducati. Are they actually going to be any good though? Well, fortunately, I think it's only 3 weeks away before I'll get to ride them at a press event in the UK. So do keep your eyes peeled if you want to see that video. And also, it looks like I'll be able to take out the striking looking C1002V Cruiser, which is built upon the same engine, and so I'll report back on that one as well. Now, one of the things that I've seen in the comments of these videos is that some of the viewers based out in the US want a bit more US specific news. US is our biggest audience as well, so I'm happy to oblige. And one of the things that I've noticed over the past week or two is that there are plenty of bikes now being announced for the US market that previously weren't made available. One of them is CF Moto's 675 NK, which is the naked equivalent of the 675 SS sports bike, both of them powered by CF Moto's relatively recent inline triple. Now, the SS version, the sports bike version, was already confirmed for the US for 2025, but it's only just this week or so that the NK has also been announced, and so that one could be a good option to look into if you want a low-priced middleweight naked and a triple engine as well, which is, a nice differentiator, and it's expected to come in at about $7,000. Also from China, Chigee Motor have massively expanded their list of bikes that are approved for sale in the US, with their inline 4-powered SRK 600 naked and the SRK 600 RC sports bike, their V-twin powered SRV 350 VS and V4 powered SRV 600 V Cruisers, and then 2 adventure bikes with the SRT 800SX and the SVT 650 V-twin. I'm really starting to feel like the Chinese brands, they're getting a lot right in terms of value for money, but they really need to work on some of these names. I know Japanese bikes, for example, like the CBR 1000 RRR, are not exactly, catchy, but at least there's another name, Fireblade, which you can say a lot quicker. So we need some more friendly side second names there. But look, that Cruiser looks the most interesting to me at just 561 cc's. It seems like a bit of a bonkers choice to go for a V4 engine configuration because it seems unnecessarily expensive to build that kind of engine for effectively what's a 500, but it does make 67 horsepower up at 10,000 RPM, I believe, so I bet it sounds pretty damn good when you've really got the throttle open there. More choice, in my opinion, is always a good thing, more affordable bikes to choose from on the market, but I'd love to know in the comments whether you'd seriously consider one of these new bargain bikes as one of your own. At the much more premium end of the spectrum though, while high-end German car tuners Brabus have built in the past, their really interesting looking interpretation of KTM Super Duke, so it's a Brabus take on it with a body kit and different wheels and stuff like that. And CycleWorld report that they've actually got a new one on the way with the name 1400R being registered. Now, the first one was called the 1300R, and it was built upon the 1290 Super Duke R. And so it doesn't take a genius to work out that the 1400R is probably going to be built upon the 1390, the most recent version of the Super Duke. In the past, they've only been available in Europe, but apparently the 1400 is set to become their first bike to sell in the US, with it appearing on the EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency's, list of bikes to be approved for US emissions. Aside from the price though, I think the last one was about 40 grand. You know, the other big hurdle is the current financial struggles of KTM, which we have covered in some detail, but you know, effectively, if you're not up to speed, they've got to pay a lot of money in May to their creditors, 500 or 600 million euros, in order to meet the obligations from some recent court proceedings, and they've not been that clear about where that money's going to come from. Then they've also got this massive backlog of bikes to clear through, which is believed to be about 250,000, so they're discounting their old stock to try and get rid of it. And so yeah, while the paperwork for emissions in the US does seem to be underway, perhaps the reality is that there'll be quite a wait for this new Brabus bike while KTM get themselves in order. Last month, we were at the London Motorcycle Show, and one of the bikes that really stood out to me was the new Bimota KB998 Rimini. If you're not aware, Bimota are now part owned by Kawasaki, and so in making a return to World Superbikes this year, they've built their new race bike upon the ZX-10RR, just with their own chassis, their own styling of course, and also some interesting aero winglets. World Superbike rules of course specify that you've got to sell the bikes in order to be able to race them, hence why we have these crazy fast sports bikes on the market that are super expensive, like the BMW M1000RR or the Ducati Panigale V4R. This one though, it's just been announced, will be no different in terms of the pricing. It's going to be 37,777 quid, and they'll be available from April this year through Bimota dealers. Now that's pretty much the maximum 44,000 euro limit that the World Superbike homologation rules permit. Although, to be fair, you do get a pretty stunning bike for the money. It is also fairly exclusive. They say for this first year, they're only going to produce 250 of them. And like I say, you get some quite interesting features like those aero winglets, which are actually electronically adjustable. So they automatically change angle based on whether you're braking or accelerating or cornering in order to deliver the maximum possible downforce for that scenario. 37,777 quid though? I don't know, let me know in the comments. Now, we also recently reported on the rumours that a new retro Honda was on the way, potentially built around their super affordable CB1000 Hornet Naked, but just with the styling taken from their CBF concept that they showed at EICMA a couple of years back. I guess the idea would be a direct competitor for Kawasaki's really popular Z900 RS, and with the concept being so good looking, I thought it looked absolutely fantastic. And also the CB1000 Hornet being a brilliant bike to ride, well, it seems like Honda could be onto a winning formula by mashing those two things together. Just this week though, pics have surfaced from the 2025 edition of the Osaka Motor Show, which show a prototype that looks much closer to what you might expect from a final production version. Naturally, it's not quite as striking as the CBF concept because you don't have quite such angular bodywork, and also, you know, you don't have some of the more premium expensive features like the single-sided swing arm. But ultimately, if that makes it more affordable to produce or more realistic to produce, and it means the bike will be more affordable when it hits the market, then I think overall I'm probably in favour of it. And look, it still should get the 150-ish horsepower of the Hornet from that 2017 Fireblade derived engine. And the chassis spec looks similar with the upside-down fork and the radial Nissin brakes. And the only thing that I can see that might be a bit of a disappointment here is that it doesn't get, you know, more traditional fitting of the period analog clocks as opposed to the TFT dash of that CB1000 Hornet. I will say though, there are a lot of settings and features in terms of modes and rider aids that are built into the CB1000 Hornet, so maybe it would be a bit too tricky to manage all that stuff with, you know, analog clocks with tiny LCDs set into them. Now, it does look pretty close to production. It doesn't have a number plate or mirrors, but hopefully Honda can sort those out fairly quickly. And so if it does look, you know, like the bike we're seeing in the pictures here, well, I just really hope they can hang on to the Hornet's pricing, which has been a massive factor in its success. I'll remind you, the base model starts at £8,999 here in the UK, £9,999 for the SP model with the Brembo brakes and the Öhlins shock. And so potentially, because this one looks more similar to the base bike, but you can probably expect to pay a bit more for the fancy styling, hopefully it'll come in around that 10 grand mark, which would make it really very competitive. It'd be about 2 grand less, for example, than a Z900 RS, or 2.5 grand less than the base Triumph Speed Twin 1200. So look, what do you think? Another cool concept from Honda, or a bit too watered down from that original CBF? Let me know what you think of this one down in the comments. But let's round off this week with a look at some beautiful custom builds, courtesy of a competition that Triumph France are running with their dealers at the moment, where you can actually head to the website and vote for your favorite, and credit to Visordown for picking this one up. For me, there are almost too many to choose from in terms of my favorites, but if I had to pull out some highlights, one would be this supercharged Speed Twin 1200, which definitely stands out from the crowd with the fluorescent yellow on the frame and the back wheel. And I guess that might be a reference to Triumph's new racing yellow, which you'll see on stuff like the motocross bikes. This Daytona 660, though, also looks particularly good in yellow. That looks like the yellow that you can currently get on the Tiger Sport 800. And they've also finished it off quite nicely with a bit of carbon. Having owned a Trident 660 a year or two back, I was very interested to see this Cafe Racer treatment with what looks like the fairing off a Thruxton, but then also a black and gold paint job, which looks a little bit like their bikes from their TFC program. But I think my favorite of the bunch could be this more aggressive extreme version of the Scrambler 400X. So you've got spoked wheels, knobbly tires, a higher custom exhaust system, a high mount front mudguard, an upgraded rear shock, I believe, and also a nice custom paint job. So look, I'll put a link to the website where you can see them all down in the description below, so you can go and cast your vote. Although of course you might need to brush up on your French to read through the specs and details, or I guess you could just fire up Google Translate, as I did, to get some of those details. As always though, I'd love to know what you think of them, so do let me know down in the comments below, and I'll leave you with last week's episode on the screen now in case you missed it, in which we looked at some of the incredible financial results from Ducati, a new special edition of the Panigale, and also a massive price drop on one of Harley's most affordable models. Do hit subscribe for more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on MOTOBOB. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.